Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the fifth Webstival of the Climate Europe 2 project. This time will focus on the emerging developments in AI and co-production in the context of climate services standardization. My name is Francisco Douglas Reyes. I work at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and I'm the co-coordinator of the Climate Europe 2 project along with Sam Granger. This is the fifth Webstival in a series of Webstivals organized by the Climate Europe 2 project that are taking place every 6 months, more or less. You can find the old information from the previous Webstivals in the Climate Europe 2 website if you're interested. In this particular one, next slide, please. We have an agenda that is covering 3 days between today, tomorrow, and this Friday, with activities that will take place between 9:30 and 1 p.m. Central European Time, with a coffee break in the middle. There are both plenary sessions and parallel sessions that will be reported in the last day in the concluding session. And we will start today. Next slide, please. With a plenary session looking into the co-production of climate services and the foundations for their standardization. This first session will be followed by a series of interactive parallel sessions focusing this time on co-production, and that you will be guided through after the coffee break. The Webstival, next slide, please, is recorded. If you're not keen on appearing in the recording, we suggest that you switch off your camera. We also encourage you to raise any questions that you might have. You can write the questions in the Zoom chat. That is one of the options that appears at the bottom of your screen. And you can also take the stage if you want to ask or formulate your question in person, or you want to make a comment. You can raise your hand in the participants option, in the reaction option, also in Zoom, in the Zoom menu. We also remind everyone that a full description of the Webstival activities has been shared by the Webstival organizers by email. It's available to all those that have registered in the Webstival. If any of you is participating here and hasn't registered properly or has not received the description, the booklets describing the Webstival activities, write a message in the chat, and they will contact you with this information. Next slide, please. So this is the first session, the lineup for this session that is going to be initially be moderated by myself. And then there will be other colleagues that will take over the floor to moderate the different activities in this session. The session is running until 11 Central European Time, and we'll start by a presentation with a presentation by Asun Lera Sancler, who works at DMV and also the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and she will present the key messages obtained by the partners in the Climate Europe 2 Horizon Europe project, and that will be followed by other presentations and a discussion. Before giving the floor to Asun, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of the Webstival, who have put a lot of effort to make this fifth Webstival a reality, and to make sure that the best information about co-production and the penetration of AI in climate services reaches you and offers you an opportunity to share your views with the rest of the Climate Europe 2 community. And without further ado, I invite Asun to take over the screen and share her own screen and start her keynote with all of us. Thanks a lot, Asun, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Paco, and welcome everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation and for the organizers, CNCC, to allow me to start opening this fifth Webstival by presenting some 9 key messages that the consortium has harvested from the very rich work that the consortium has done during the past year in 2025. This is just a synthesis. If you get the QR code, you will be able to read the full report. It's still not very long, but there you will have the possibility to then access the information of the different deliverables from which these messages emerge. Before I start presenting very briefly the messages, I also want to say that this year, the consortium, or this past year, the consortium has really focused attention on looking into the real world practice of climate services. And therefore, these messages emerge not only from the deliverables in the project, but also from specific activities such as running a series of common case studies through different types of climate services providers. And it also flows from in-person workshops that were held last year with different perspectives, private providers of climate services, another one focused on the health and humanitarian sector, and a third one that was focused on the finance, insurance, and reinsurance sector, which will also be a topic in the third day of this Webstival. So what is the one of the main messages that emerge from this work is very clearly that the landscape of European climate services is actually quite fragmented with a domination of research institutions, but also with an increasing participation of public institutions and private providers in delivering not only weather services, but climate services. And despite, however, of the fragmentation of this current landscape and this dominance of the sort of research and European-funded climate services, there is quite a lot of appetite for standardizing the field and for also creating mechanisms such that this fragmentation can be corrected as the years go by. And also, of course, the role of standardization, which we will all be hearing the details in a little bit, is also one way to address this fragmentation. One of the case studies, and this is our second message that we did, was about C3S, or Copernicus Climate Change Service, which is the organization that plays a central role as a European-wide climate data infrastructure. At the national level, we have the National Hydromet Services, but at the European level, the role of CCS is very important. And here, what we have done is to evaluate and assess the type of work that they are doing. And what we find, for example, and that is worth highlighting, is that C3S really puts quite a lot of effort on providing quality assured data and tools that are free and open to use by any actor in Europe and also worldwide. That it shows awareness of the importance of user engagement, that it's important as well that we consider the sustainability and the investments that C3S may need to be maintained over time, as well as perhaps more focus on creation of stronger partnerships, such that the services can actually have relevance for many different user communities, in addition to, let's say, the ones that are more coming from the top at the European level. The third message emerges from our interaction, in particular with climate services providers. We had the pleasure to hold a meeting which was held for the first time with a series of different leading private providers in Europe. It was very interesting to see that the language of climate services is very unevenly used. Many of you already know that. Very often it's not even used, the term climate services, but rather many of the companies offering this talk about environmental risk or environmental services and so forth. We also found that regulatory reporting and compliance is an extremely important driver of these private provider services, that they are often delivered through a combination of consultancy and advisory support. And the reason for that is actually the theme of today, is the central importance of co-production with users, and in this case, with clients, and the importance of contextualizing the services. And lastly, also worth highlighting that this group and others that have signed up to a joint statement that you can also find in our website show very strong interest on an expansion of networking opportunities, capacity building, and the maturity of standards such that the market can be level, as well as eventually the creation of assurance mechanisms and certification schemes. As I also said, we had run sectoral events with particular sectors, and here what we actually see is the importance of having not only a standardization that has broad agreement on a shared baseline of issues that should be common to all climate services, regardless of the sector in which they are being used, but that at the same time, we need a flexible and layer approach such that it allows for sectoral practices and that it allows also for those sectors to be compliant as well with what can be regulatory obligations, particularly for that. So the message is that standards that are too generic risk irrelevance in a sectoral level, while those that are too sector specific may risk fragmentation. So we want to have both, and that makes modularity essential. My last messages from 5 to 9 refer to the standardization strategy that the Climate Europe 2 project has been maturing, and we will explain later how this is also being uptaken at the European level by CEN and ELEC. Just a refresher for all of you who are new to our project. In the previous years, one of the things that we did was to try to break up the complex concept of climate services into different components, 4 components: decision, context, ecosystem of actors and co-production processes, the different knowledge systems, and then the delivery mode and evaluation. And then over time, and as we have been working, trying to identify requirements and recommendations for all these different bits of the climate services, we realized that we needed to actually provide more granularity. And what we have done in our standardization strategy is identify, harvesting from all the results of the project and from all the hard work of all the partners in this project, what can be different subcomponents for each of these parts. And by breaking a complex system into smaller pieces, it will allow us to actually eventually lead to a much stronger and robust standardization strategy, and eventually to identify what should be the must-have, the requirements, what should be the good-have, the recommendations. So just, and I understand that this is quite a lot of information, but as the days will follow, you will see that this will be repeated. The first decision-making context is being proposed to be divided into these 4 subcomponents that deal with actually framing the problem, how to translate user needs into user requirements, the integration of the perspective into the design of the actual architecture of the climate service, and also considerations of innovation and identification and integration of innovation requirements and business models. The subcomponent that relates to the ecosystem of actors and co-production can be divided into the process of identifying and mapping the actors relevant, the engagement with these actors, the interactions, iterative interactions that need to regulate this co-production, the topic of today, and also the governance structures that might actually hinder or promote such interaction and co-production processes. The knowledge systems is quite complex in the sense that it requires a combination of very technical aspects together with non-technical issues. So it's about the data, information, knowledge selection, and evaluation. And here by knowledge, we include not only climate data and information, but other sources of knowledge important for the climate services, the translation and communication of this knowledge, issues related to data quality control and data management, and lastly, questions related to data stewardship and governance. And the ninth message is about the fourth subcomponent, is about the delivery mode and evaluation, the identification of suitable delivery channels and formats for the particular goal of a particular climate service, the way in which tailored information and products are processed and are integrated, and the monitoring and evaluation, sorry, it's a mistake there, feedback and learning mechanisms. Again, you can actually see all these and read more in detail the text that accompanies the document. But now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Sayo Azorita, and she will be actually harvesting some information about these subcomponents and engaging all of you. So back to you, Sayo.
Thank you, Asun. As Asun mentioned, I'm Sayo Azorita from Tecnalia, and I will be moderating this interaction with the audience. We will do it through a Mentimeter, as you can see in the screen. So while you are, I can see already 15 people have signed. Let's wait a bit more, and I will start sharing my screen. Okay. So I will wait just a couple more seconds before we start with the first questions. We have a series of questions just to get your reflections, because it is also important for Climate Europe 2 to get a further feedback and understanding of other actors working and using climate services. So now we are 34 people within Mentimeter. Okay. You can still join, just going through this code in case you haven't had the chance. And the first question that we want to pose to you is, if you can, in one word or in a short phrase, let us know what is your biggest challenge with climate services. And Asun just presented different key messages that we have. And these are based on the work that we have been doing in the last 12 months. And I can see already some wording, like trust was the first word that appeared on the screen. And actually, we have discussed this specific word within also co-production. How important is trust for co-production and therefore for climate services? But I can see also uptake, uncertainty here, whether it may be climate uncertainty or uncertainty. This needs maybe a further clarification. Trust is and usability seem to be standing out. But I can see transparency, evaluation, value of climate services. So there are many of these wording actually have been part of our work and our discussion over the last year. I will allow just a couple more seconds because I see that 27 out of 39 people who have joined have voted, and I want to leave a bit more time. But since we have some few other slides, I think I will user demand trust usability. I will move on to the next one to allow time for us to go through all the questions. So now the next four questions or slides are related to these subcomponents that Asun has presented, and we would like to get feedback from you around which subcomponents do you think that would benefit most from standardization or harmonization. So you can vote from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And here you have these four subcomponents for this main climate service component. And the reason for this is that we are working on standardization as well, which it will be presented later on. And it would be good to understand where you think there is most need for having a harmonized guidance or a standard. From this component, we have 13 answers, and so far so good. The designing of the architecture of climate services seems, to the audience, as the most important subcomponents to standardize or have harmonized guidelines to deliver this. And here we can see more or less how people have voted. So there is, in any case, there is a wide spread on the answers from the participants of today's web festival. Okay, we will move to the next slide because otherwise we will not have enough time. Here is the same process, but here we will be focusing on ecosystem of actors and co-production processes. And we have, again, 4 subcomponents for this component, and we would like to know which of these subcomponents would benefit most from standardization or harmonization guidelines. Here we can see that the governance structure are a bit leading, but things are moving as different people are voting. Interaction processes seems not to be the one that would benefit less from your opinion on this harmonization. Okay. So we have 21 answers. I will wait just a couple more minutes. Okay. I think we can move on to the next slide. And here again, we would be now asking you to assess the benefits of standardizing or harmonizing these subcomponents from the knowledge system. And from these 4 components, well, we only have 3 answers, 7 answers. But again, it seems that most people think that data stewardship and governance is a subcomponent that would benefit, followed by data quality control and management. We can see higher rankings to compare to the co-production and ecosystem of actors. This is, of course, the most technical component, and usually there is a higher need for having a harmonized guidance and standardization. Okay, 23 answers. I will let a few more seconds. Nothing is moving, so we will go to the last component, and as the three previous ones, the rationale is the same. We want to hear from you on which of these four components would benefit most from standardization, and here we are talking about the delivery mode and evaluation. Okay, things are moving. There is no very good agreement around this component, but monitoring and evaluation frameworks are at present the subcomponents that most of you think would benefit most from standardization and harmonization. Okay, we have 17 answers. I will allow a few more seconds to get more answers on this. Okay, so I think no more answers are coming in, so I will go to the next slide, and now we change a bit the focus from the subcomponents to identify gaps. So we would like to hear from you. We have identified different components and subcomponents for the different components, and we would like to hear from you whether you think we are missing or overlooking something else that would be good to be considered for standardization. So our first answer is individual and highly specific user needs. I wonder whether this is more a barrier than maybe it's something that not that we should standardize, but something that will affect the standardization. And we within Climate Year 2, we are of course discussing these specific needs in context-specific circumstances. Something that it would be good to standardize, I guess, is share indicators across probably the climate service, so more around monitoring and evaluation. For intercomparison of climate data, for example, you need to have standard methods to compare models and observational outputs, data quality monitoring, uncertainty communication. This also has been something that we have discussed a lot within the project, the importance. Also, I see interoperability and share indicators, again, metadata. Not everything can be standardized. Actually, our next question is about that. Standards, mandates for issuing climate warnings. Okay, thank you very much for all these inputs, and we will move to the last question so we can proceed on time with the rest of the session. Our last question is precisely on the one thing that you think should not be standardized, because we are also aware that not everything is prone or there is a need for standardizing. Engagement approaches, highly individualized user requests, trust building, communication part, user needs. Okay. Local engagement. Actually, today's work is about co-production, and we will present now in a few minutes about the standardization and the work that the project is doing about co-production processes and how we try to build on standardizing these co-production processes through guidelines. So I will just end the presentation here. I will stop sharing my screen, and I would like to give the floor to my colleagues Yusuf Yilmaz and Adam Sinclair. Yusuf is from DIN, the German Standardization National Body, and Asun presented the key messages, and she is part of Climate Europe too, and they will give you a bit of a short presentation of what the standardization is and what type of work we are doing around the standardization in Climate Europe too, and how we are also involved in actual standardization processes within Europe, which is the Technical Committee 467, which deals with climate change. So please, Yusuf, I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sayo. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you very much for the introduction and the transition. So hello, everyone. My name is Yusuf Yilmaz. As introduced, I'm from the German Institute for Standardization, also known as shortly by DIN, and I will give a presentation about the ongoing standardization activity, which has been initiated during the time of the Climate Europe 2 project. So since we are talking about standardization, naturally, I have to start with a definition. And if you believe it or not, there's actually a standard about standards. The so-called, or the known European Standard 45020. And within that standard about standards, the standardization process is defined as the activity in which experts from different interested parties contribute their knowledge, draft requirements, recommendations, definitions, and so on, and engage in meetings until they reach consensus. Next slide, please. Yeah, so after we have the definition of the standardization process, let me give you two examples of why standardization or international standardization is important and why standardization should be considered at an early stage. So on the top left-hand corner, I brought an example with a picture of a plugs and sockets. The reason behind that is if you have been traveling outside of Europe and for vacation, maybe you have encountered or have experienced that your plugs from home are not compatible with the sockets of that destination region. The reasoning behind that is that standardization basically was too late for that topic. That's why every region or every country have established their own so-called island solutions. And those island solutions have been established. So that's why we today have the situation where we have to deal with different adapters when we're traveling and with different plugs and sockets all around the globe, because basically standardization in that case was too late. But on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see an example or a picture of ISO containers, which shows the great impact of international or successful international standardization, where the formats, the length, the width, all the attributes of an ISO container have been standardized in the ISO 668. And 250 million of those ISO containers are traveling the globe each year, which shows the great impact of international standardization and also the importance, of course. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is the result or what's the output of the standardization process? So we have learned that what's the standardization process and why is it important to have an early engagement also for innovative solutions or technologies. So the result of the standardization process is a document which provides rules, guidelines, or attributes or characteristics for activities or their results. So basically you end up with a document describing the terminology. So that's especially important if you're dealing with the topic of a lower TRL level. So just to have a common understanding, first you start by defining terms, and that could be a terminology standard. You can also define or standardize product attributes, requirements, or basic principles, let's say. You can also standardize the interfaces between certain actors. You can standardize processes to enhance the efficiency and also the quality of services and also testing methods. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are the benefits of standardization? So if we have to pinpoint the benefits and have to summarize it, we can do it by saying that firstly, standardization is a tool to make possible to enhance the knowledge transfer and the sustainability of the research findings. Because if we think of research or research projects, every research project has their own, let's say, approach or their own objectives and results they want to achieve at the end stage. And after that, we have certain research findings or outcomes. And through transferring those findings into standardization, you ensure that the knowledge has been transferred and also have made sure that the knowledge coming out of research is also preserved in the form of a document. Also, the market credibility can be facilitated through standardization because reference frameworks can strengthen the transparency and also build trust, because standards are also considered as a sort of a brand. And if you have a brand you are familiar with, the trust and also the transparency automatically increases for everyone. Also, standardization is an open and public process. So everyone who is interested can join. Everyone is welcome to contribute. That's why you have also ensure broader stakeholder alignment. And that means that you are able to represent and also make sure that you have the consistency across diverse actors and different interested parties. And lastly, you have also the aspect of the quality assurance and the risk reduction, since there is a risk of unused services. And you also have to consider that if there are a lot of results or a lot of findings going in the same direction or addressing the same topic, you also have to deal with higher costs at the end for adaptation, for example, or even the development or redesign. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about standard documents, maybe you have heard of certain types of documents. Maybe you heard of ISO standards. Maybe you have heard of technical reports, or maybe you have even heard of so-called consortium standards. And consortium standards, even though the term consortium standard is being used, there are actually no standard documents in our sense. And the different types of standard documents which exist and also are called standards can create and form a lot of confusion. And just to clarify the different types of standard documents, I wanted to show you that graph. So what can you see here? So on the x-axis, you can see the time, which is the development time certain or every document takes. So the duration time to create and also publish a document type. On the y-axis, you can see the level of consensus, meaning that the higher you go on the y-axis, the level of consensus gets higher, and the more you go on the right side along the x-axis, the longer it takes to develop a certain type of document. So at the bottom, as I said, you have the consortium standard. They are called consortium standards, sometimes also a company standard or even a common practice. And it's important to know that those type of documents are not standards. And the reason behind that is firstly, those type of standards are often not publicly available. So they are not considered as something for the public. And most of the time, it's only created by one organization or one entity. And because of that, they are not standards in our sense, but they are called standards. And after that, in the middle, we have the workshop agreements, which is a type of standards document. Within that bracket, you can place in international workshop agreements, IWAs, CEN Workshop Agreements, which are the European Workshop Agreements, but also technical reports and technical specifications can belong in that same bracket. So workshop agreements, they take about 6 to 18 months in general. They have a certain level of consensus, even though they don't have the highest level of consensus, meaning that you don't have to include all interested parties, but everyone who wants to join, everyone who wants to contribute is welcome to join and to contribute and their technical expertise. And at the top, the final one, you have the well-known and the established full standard documents. For example, the international standards are the ISO standards. The European standards are called the EN standards. And after that, you have different national standards, meaning that for every country, there is a national standardization body, or NSB. So for Germany, for example, it's DIN. For France, it's AFNOR. For Spain, I think it was UNE. And for the United States, ANSI, and so on. So every nation has their own entity which can develop such full standard documents. Those type of standard documents take the longest time. So we starting off from 3 years until 4, 5, or even 6 years of development time. And the reason behind that is that for a full standard to be published, you have to reach full consensus. And secondly, you have to include all interested parties, meaning that you have a very big consortium. Just imagine that you have 50 or 60 persons coming from different sectors with different interests. And they all have to come together. They have to find themselves in a neutral platform, and they have to agree on what has been discussed and edited. So at the end, you have a document, and all of those interested parties, they have to be engaged and involved, and you have to reach full consensus. And that's why this process takes a lot of time, but also ensures the consensus. Next slide, please. Yeah. So for my first part of presentation, that's it. And now I will give over to Asun, and I will then continue with the second part of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yusuf. So what I wanted to present here is what is happening on the standardization of climate services at the European level. So here we are talking about the top level of standards that Yusuf just presented. The Climate Europe 2 project had the opportunity to actually contribute to the commenting the draft of the standardization request of the European Commission. This is just one way in which standards are emerging. This is like a request that the European Commission presents, and then it goes to all these national standards bodies. And here what you can see is that as of the 15th of October last year, this standardization request was formally signed, and it asks for two things. It asks for the development of new standards on climate services, and it also asks for the mainstreaming of adaptation to climate change in existing European standards that have a long life cycle of critical infrastructure. And just briefly to inform all of you who are with us today, there are already 2 standards ongoing executing this standardization request. These are full standards that cover the full scope of climate services. So we will be talking later about the CEN Workshop Agreement on co-production, but at the same time, these standards are ongoing. The first one is a framework standard called Principles, Requirements, and Guidelines that is already being developed. And then in actually a matter of weeks, we will also start the process of initiating the drafting of a second standard on management systems and processes related to climate services. But now we want to shift back to the presentation of the CEN Workshop Agreement, which will be the thread on co-production for the rest of the day. So back to you, Yusuf.
Thank you very much, Asun. So as I said, now I will go more into detail about the initiated standardization activity within the Climate Europe 2 project. So for the Climate Europe 2 project, we have initiated the CEN Workshop Agreement, the CWA, as I have explained. The definition of a CWA is a flexible and more faster process to develop a standards document within few workshops with individual interested parties. So as just like for a full standard, a CWA is a public process. So it's open to any company or organization. It's not only interesting for the project consortium. The content can be very diverse, so you can choose between technical specifications, guidance materials, you can have best practices, you can have informations, and so on. So you have no limitations in that sense. But the three differences or advantages towards a full standard are that for a CWA, you don't have to have physical meetings, which require traveling across Europe for meetings. For a CWA, you are more flexible and you can decide to only have online meetings, which makes the whole handling easier, I think, in my opinion. And also the long-term effect is ensured because a CWA, just like in this case, can become a basis for a future EN or ISO standard. So the longevity is also ensured, and also the visibility is also another key factor because if you have tried to access or read a full standard document, maybe you have noticed that you have to pay a fee to grant access, and you have to get a license every time you want to read a standard document. But the CWA is free of any charge. It's available as a free PDF download on its CEN webpage. So every CWA that has been published or will be published will be available as a free download. And the last, I think there were some last few words, but also another difference is that the authors or the contributors of a CWA can be listed namely in the foreword. So in this slide, you can see the development process of a CWA. I don't want to go too much into detail, but we have mainly three stages. So the first one is the initiation phase, where the so-called project plan is being developed together with the initiator. So a project plan is a document which describes the scope, objectives, the work plan, also the deliverables that are planned for the CEN workshop. After that, we move on to the actual development or actual elaboration phase of the contents of the document. And after that, finally, you move on to the publication of the CWA, and every CWA is valid for a 3-year time period. And after 3 years, you can decide if the topic is still relevant. You can decide to extend the CWA's lifetime for another 3 years. So it's possible to have a CWA online and available for up to 6 years. And this whole process takes 6 to 18 months, approximately. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as I said, we have initiated this CWA within the Climate Europe 2 project. The title of this CWA is Climate Service Guidance for Co-Production, which has a direct link and contribution to the CEN-TC, the existing CEN-TC 467, Working Group 2 on climate change. The motivation behind this CEN Workshop Agreement was that the Climate Europe 2 project has identified a need for a deep dive guidance to provide a structured and transparent collaboration methodology that, based on evidence, has proven more effective in creating fit for purpose and usable climate services. So I think now it's very interesting because we have gained a lot of insightful information from the Mentimeter, and I hope that we can tackle those challenges or those aspects you have mentioned previously in the Mentimeter. Also, the goal of the CWA is to establish a methodology to provide a structured, transparent, and also reproducible way to collaborate by moving from raw climate data to actionable, relevant, and also usable climate-informed decision-making. Next slide, please. And yeah, so this CWA is also intended to provide input to the first European EN climate services standard on principles, requirements, and guidances. As I said, this will be developed in the respective CEN-TC I have mentioned, and also the CWA will provide substantive input to the European and also management and processes aspects. Next slide, thank you. So this is my final slide. So I want to end my presentation with an open call. So if you are interested, if you have any expertise you can offer or contribute to, you are more than welcome to join us. How can you contribute in this activity? You can provide your technical feedback contribute by defining requirements or guidelines. If you decide to join us, you can be registered as a full member of the consortium, of the CEN Workshop Consortium, not the project consortium. You can participate and can get or granted access to the discussions and the online meetings, and also provide your sectoral experience to ensure the practical and also cross-sectoral guidelines. What are the benefits for you of joining us? So you can directly influence and also impact the future standards. Your contribution can be visible because every contributor or every author can be listed namely in the foreword of the document. That's also a networking and also knowledge sharing opportunity for you with the CE2 consortium. And you can also make sure through your technical contribution and feedback to enhance the technical quality and the market relevance of the future standard. And lastly, no registration or administrative fees are due, because we as Dean cover all of the administrative fees. And for the registration, there are no additional fees requested in any form. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. I don't know if you want questions now or collect them all in the chat and answer them
Yes.
afterwards.
Hello, Yusuf. Thank you, Yusuf, for the presentation. Actually, we got 3 questions regarding standardization on the chat. Since we are running a bit late with our timing, I will read them, and but of course, if anyone wants to pose the question, it's also fine, but I think it would be a bit quicker. So I will start with the last one, and one of the questions is, who defines or define the different type of standards you introduce? I think those are the 2 that Asun presented. This is what I think they are referring to.
I'm not sure if with type they mean like full standards or CWAs or something else. Maybe they can clarify, because I'm also not sure.
Yes, I was actually referring to the slide that you presented, Yusuf, with the different types of standards.
With the graph, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so a full standard, let's say the Dean standard or EN standard, has to be initiated by an NSB. So you have to request for a full standard and you have to forward that request to an NSB. And if you live, let's say, in Spain, that would be UNE. In France, that would be AFNOR. But in case of a CWA, even without the inclusion of an NSB, but let's say in our case, we are a project consortium, and we can decide to have a CEN Workshop Agreement without the approval or the request of an NSB. So the difference is the CEN Workshop Agreement can be initiated by everyone, just a group of experts, let's say, but a full standard has to go through the process of the NSB and also has to comply with all the standardization aspects and rules. But CEN Workshop Agreement, as I presented, is more flexible and has their own rules. I hope that was understandable.
Can I also add, Yusuf, and thanks for the question, Christine, that a consortium that has a liaison agreement with a particular committee directly can also propose a standard.
Yes,
and the standard is proposed. So, for example, let's say in the case of Climate Europe 2 project that has a liaison agreement with the formal technical committee that is standardizing climate services, will have actually the possibility to propose a standard as well. And this is true of any project that has such liaison agreements with a technical body at the European level.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I think we're running a bit out of time. Maybe what I would suggest is that, Yusuf, you go through the chat and you answer the questions, because I would like to pass the word to Sam Greiner, so he can start or presents the next part of the session on co-production reflection. So back to you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Sayol, and good morning, everyone. So just for those who aren't aware, my name is Sam Granger. I'm based at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and I coordinate Climate Europe 2 together with Paco Dobles-Payas. And I'll be taking over the moderation for the rest of the morning. So for the last half an hour of this session, and to really get the juices flowing, really ahead of breakout discussions later this morning, we are going to hear a series of short talks, contributions from members of the Climate Europe 2 project, who have been exploring in more detail the topic of co-production and how it relates to standardization. So during the project, they have been examining kind of the opportunities, challenges, and potential tensions between co-production and standardization across different policy and governance contexts. So first, we have a short talk from Dr. Grit Martinez. Hi, Grit. Good morning.
Good morning.
Grit is a social scientist working on climate perceptions and the role of knowledge in place-based contexts at the Ecologic Institute in Berlin and an associated research professor at the University of Maryland. So Grit, I believe you have some slides for us. Excellent, there they are. Over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Sam. My name is Grit Martinez, and I want to very briefly guide you to what we did in this project from the lenses through policy and going from a more practical approach, what policy making means at the ground. So the next slide, please. I will very briefly frame the problem and gives you some key insights through the lenses of co-production, obviously, and give you some examples from a survey with EU policymakers we did recently. The next slide, please. So as we all know, climate services really sits at the intersection of science and policy. They are fundamentally science-driven, but they're strongly policy-shaped in how they're used and delivered. So in other words, without science, climate policies wouldn't exist. Science is the foundation, but climate services rely on disciplines like climate science, meteorology, use observation models, data analysis. So standardization in climate services is primarily driven by science, but formalized and enforced through policy, obviously. And neither works alone. Policy essentially is a set of principles, rules, and guidelines, and they play both different roles in the process. So it's a true bridge between knowledge and practical action. Policy and climate sciences, they work very strong and together. But the key challenge is how can standards for climate services remain relevant for policy and in turn for diverse local decision contexts and practical actions. And I think we hear that through the comments from our audience already. So the next slide, please. So there are basically a couple of insights we would like to share with you. I mean, in Climate Europe 2, we explored through these challenges through the lenses of co-production. So we wanted to know how knowledge providers, policymakers, and local actors work on the topic of standardization and how far they are involved already and what they can do together. And our core message is that co-production is not only about producing data together, it's about aligning climate knowledges with decision ecologies and governance contexts, as you heard in the morning already. And in the terms of our project and what we did here in this particularly aspect, co-production is really context sensitive. It's not just data creation, it's tailored knowledge to real-world decision context, ecology and governance context. And it involves a multiple attitude of actors, scientists, policymakers, stakeholders, and end users. And the success requires governance-aware design, so understanding legal, institutional, and social constraints, ensuring climate knowledge is actually really used. The next slide, please. And please don't try to read all the pictures. This is just an overview of a survey we did last year with European policymakers, knowledge holders, and practitioners all across Europe. And we had several questions, and I'm highlighting them here in the graphs, where we really wanted to understand how policymakers, knowledge holders, and practitioners think about climate services and especially standards. So we had several questions. For instance, we wanted to know if climate services have been used and climate services are known, and the answers were overwhelming yes. We asked if knowledge holders, policymakers are involved in participation of designing a service. Yeah, so the answers were less high, but of course a high number still participated in the design of climate services. We were not aware of this before, but it happened. And then we had several questions on if they were really involved in the co-design process and what kind of information they found interesting during this process. And again, lots of answers were that climate services are being used on the one hand, but also policymakers, practitioners are involved in the design. But when we ask more specifically about standards and how standards are really affecting the working arena, we found that the answers were more blurred, that also certain standards which we thought might be really interesting, for instance, for companies working with environmental issues, like the ISO 14091 on environmental risk, we found it interesting to know that not so much information was really on the ground on certain standards on how they can be impactful used for their own work. So the next slide, please. That lets us to the next slide, please. That lets us to some of these conclusions you can read here. On the one hand, climate information is clearly being used in practice. We got in high affirmations through this questions and through the surveys, but through many other facets of our project. On the other hand, there are important gaps and uncertainties. At the same time, there's a strong recognition of the value of standards. We hear this over and over again. Policymakers, knowledge providers, and practitioners are engaged in co-production processes. We hear this all the time. And at the same time, the findings highlight that co-production is valued not only for producing climate information, but for building a shared understanding. We think that climate services need to be much more aligned with real-world contexts and the needs of governance context, and this also is due for standardization. And I think that has been as a message shining through the previous speakers, and I believe it will continue with the next presentations. We will shed a little bit more light on some processes in co-production. So that's all from my side, and I remain available for questions, obviously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grit. That was great. That was a great little introduction to the work you're doing, and yeah, as it seems that while there's an understanding of the concept of co-production and standards as well, but there still is a limited knowledge of how they work in practice, and there's still lots to be done. Does anyone have a question or comment, perhaps for Grit, before we move on? That is maybe fairly brief, or a clarification, perhaps? No? Okay, I don't see any in the chat, so perhaps we could... Nikete, I see your hand is raised. Please come in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam, and thank you so much, Grit, for a very interesting presentation. It was amazing to hear all those good information that you provided. One question that I have for you is, so the survey that you did, is it available online? Can the results be accessed by the public?
Yes, and I can also, if you like, send you an email with the file. So we have a report, and the report is public, and you can read about all the results. So if you kindly leave your email address in the chat or send it to me, we will forward this to you.
Thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome.
So is this the deliverable, Grit, from the project? So I think it's actually on the project website. So maybe you can share the number of the deliverable, and then everyone can maybe find it. Do you remember the number of the deliverable? Is it 5.2? 5.2. So go on the website, and you should be able to access it there.
But in any case, for if you want to leave your email address, we are more than happy to forward this to you as well. Thank you.
Great. We have one more question here, I think, from Christine. I don't know if you've seen it, Grit, there in the chat. So I'll read it out, perhaps, and you can comment. What are the expectations towards members of the Standardization Consortium to define climate service co-creation?
Sorry, if I may, that's again Christina here. I raised that question, but that was on the earlier talk.
Apologies.
From Yusuf,
that's probably referring to Yusuf.
Motivated. So I'm expecting a written answer then from Yusuf. That's fine.
Okay,
I'm working on it.
I'm just
great.
Thank
you.
No worries. We can perhaps circle back to that later on if there's time before the coffee break. But anyway, sorry, Grit. Sorry to alarm you there. Let's move on, and thank you, Grit, again for your very interesting talk. I'd like to introduce Carlos Cuevas Garcia. Carlos is a social scientist working in the field of science and technology studies at the Technical University of Munich. His research explores the politics and practices of collaboration across scientific disciplines and diverse sectors of society. So Carlos, over to you with your short contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, next slide, please. So what I'm going to be doing in the next slide is going to take you to the most simple ways in which we can identify how co-production contrasts within, well, other styles of thinking about the relations between science and society, but also how co-production can differ in different contexts. That is something that also Grit presented in the previous slide. So just to say something about here, so co-production is one of the most important ideas in theory and practice about like knowledge and governance for global sustainability. This refers to the dynamic process through which science and society mutually shape and constitute each other. As we're going to see in my slides, there are different ways in which science and society can interact on different scales. So it's very important to consider these ones. Co-production is usually opposed to one linear understanding in which science produces results and then society benefits from them without that much interaction between the two of them. Next slide, please. So this is what the linear model of innovation looks like. That is a process that was assumed to be the ideal way in which public funding mostly would go to basic research, from which applied research would develop, then from there technologies would appear, and then innovations would go to the market to produce automatically social benefits. Co-production opposes to all of this way of thinking. If we go to next slide, we can see just a very simple way in which co-production is usually presented. You know, there you have different actors. The linear process is not necessarily there. You pay attention, as you see in this figure, to yes, scientific and generalizable knowledge, but also to context-specific knowledge and to experience. So the experience of local actors is considered interesting, and this brings inputs into the way science is produced. Next slide, please. So there's two different ways in which we can think of co-production. Of course, many different disciplines have looked at this. Many fields of real work practice have paid attention to it. And we can consider it as a discrete method. And that's probably what is the usual understanding within the communities of working on climate services. And there is the broader understanding of co-production as a historical process. And it's very important, of course, to see that there is an interaction between the two. So the method that you see on the left hand, the type of workshop, that will look incredibly different depending on the context in which you are trying to implement it. Because who the participants are will change from place to place. There will be always communities that are more favored than other ones, some that are considered more legitimate than others. And if you press again the next slide, please. So I can, okay, yeah, make them all appear, that's easier. So in the last slide, there was only this example in which I was mentioning that the ways in which co-production happens in different places are affected by like what has happened there in the past. So here I have a slide with 3 examples of co-producing climate services for the climate sector. Let's imagine that we are paying attention only to number 1. All regions of a country share what they know about climate adaptation. The advantage here is that there is pragmatic sharing, but the disadvantage is that not everything may be relevant for other actors. In the second example, a federal government provides a basic risk analysis for all ministries and regions to complement with their own data. Here there is institutional legitimacy, but the basic risk analysis that is provided by the federal government may be too simplistic, too complex, or not suitable for some departments that may be interested in a risk analysis. And in a third example, probably well, this is a real example as well. Similar regions of different countries invest together in new solutions to common challenges. The advantages is that there's international collaboration and cooperation, and there's technological innovation. The downsides is that solutions may be predefined. Solutions may predefine what problems can be addressed, and also common problems may not be the more pressing locally. If we move to my last slide. Next slide, please. Make them all appear just to gain time. So co-production is needed because more, bigger, and faster science alone is not the solution. We need to consider different criteria to define what counts as good climate information. For example, legitimacy, relevance, usability, actionability. Standards should help to ensure that different quality criteria are being considered. But of course, how these quality criteria are being achieved or how they are prioritized vary from context to context. So we need two things. Trust in standards, but also the recognition that legitimacy, that values, that procedures will look different from different places. So we cannot expect that everything will look the same in different contexts. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for that very interesting talk and kind of reflections on the work that you're doing in the project. Again, I assume there is a deliverable that people can have a look at that will reference some of these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to mention that, sorry, quickly, if you can?
Yeah, that's right. In the work that we've been doing, like from the social scientific side, we produced two deliverables on top of the one that Grit was presenting earlier with the survey. We also conducted a document analysis of different forms in which co-production is being exercised, and we have like the shorter versions of that produced in a policy brief, and one that is coming out very soon to make it more accessible to different audiences.
Excellent. And as I said, any these public deliverables are available on our website, so please do have a look, everyone. Okay, so thank you, Carlos. We're now going to move on to another Mentimeter. I believe Audrey von Lossel is with us.
Yes.
Hi, Audrey.
Hi, hello everyone.
I believe you'll be taking over and sharing your screen. Excellent. So let me just quickly introduce you, and then you can take it from here. So Audrey is another researcher involved in the project from Rambol in Belgium, I believe, and will guide us through our next, as I say, Mentimeter activity. So over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can see my screen. So there's a QR code which you can scan, so we can dive a bit deeper into the co-production aspects. So I'll be waiting a little bit so people join. I can see at the moment 11 people. So if you can either scan the QR code or directly go to menti.com and enter the code that appears on the screen. Okay, so I'll be going to the first question. This you still have the QR code and the code to join in case you were not able to before. And I wanted to start with a question asking you which statement best reflects your experience with co-production and climate services. So we have various options, which I will quickly go through as people answer. So either do you believe that co-production mainly improves the legitimacy and trust? So meaning that involving users and stakeholders would build confidence in the service, or that co-production improves mainly the relevance for local decision, meaning that it helps tailor climate information to specific local needs, contexts, and decision timelines. Another answer might be that it improves scientific robustness, meaning that it could enable highlighting missing data or improving the quality of the analysis. Or you might have the opinion that co-production rarely changes any outcome in practice, so that the final products or decision often yield similar outcomes as to what would be produced without co-production. And obviously it is very fine if you have no or limited experience with co-production, and it's also interesting for us to know it. And if you choose other, you're welcome to take the floor or write in the chat maybe, if you would like to give more information on this. So I see that there's 28 people out of 31 that already answered, which is quite good. And we can see that the option that got the most answer is about co-production, mainly improving relevance for local decisions, but very well also. So a lot of people also mentioned co-production, mainly improving legitimacy and trust. So this is very interesting. Thank you very much. We can now go to the second question, which is more open. So you can feel free again to write maybe more detailed in the chat, or take the floor, raising your hand. So the question is, in practice, what usually defines good co-production in your context? So if you have experience with it, if you maybe either can tell an example or any insights on what worked in your context. So as I said, it's an open question, so you can take some time to think about it maybe, and take the floor if needed. I see one answer at the moment, saying that stakeholder engagement defined good co-production. Mutual understanding, yes, so good communication between all involved, equal footing, clear and concrete. Yes, so all of this seems to be about understanding each other, engaging people, working on something that the community has already asked for. Yes, so taking into account the local community's needs and wishes, interactive communications, eventual uptake of the climate service and user satisfaction. Many results, yes. That's very interesting output. Stakeholder explicit positive feedback. Yes. We've got 16 answers at the moment. I don't know if more people would like to share insights. Shared goals, yes, everyone going in the same direction or looking at solving similar problems. Open invitations. Allowing enough time and good facilitation to hear all voices. Yes, making sure everyone is represented. I could check the chat in case anyone has or any questions or any comments. I don't think I can see anyone in the chat. Again, if you would like to explore a bit more or give more insights in something you have written, feel free to raise your hand. In practice, good co-production is defined by continuous and structured engagement between users and providers across the full cycle, from identifying needs to delivering and refining product. If AI is used, good co-production requires its use to be made explicit. Yes, so making sure everyone is aware of its use and how it will be used. Okay. Practical measures, yes, improving products. So I see 13 people have not yet given an answer, which is fine. But I'll leave 1 minute to write, and otherwise we can check if anyone has comments. Sharing information bidirectionally, starting by listening to users' needs and knowledge, which is key to produce something meaningful from the technical side. Open to feedback in between. Yes, so overall, what stands out of this poll is that it's very important to have good communication involving everyone, so that we're sure which goals to go for, and that co-production then works better when the whole process is clear and everyone is involved equally and ask for their input. So I will stop sharing my screen probably and see if anyone would want to jump in, maybe asking any question or diving into something that we discussed today regarding co-production.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, again, a nice sort of conversation starter and an opportunity now in the next sort of maybe 5 minutes or so to bring maybe perhaps all of the speakers back from the session. It would be nice to see your faces again and maybe give you a chance to answer any comments or questions that people have been mulling over perhaps during the talks, during the session. Perhaps we could always circle back to some of the many questions I think Yusuf you answered earlier on. But yeah, lots of questions I think have been raised in this session. Been very, as I said earlier, thought-provoking. But I wonder, I mean, maybe I can start the ball rolling and others can pick up. Others in the session here can pick it up. But something I got from Carlos's talk is this real, I think, important distinction to make between, you know, the conceptualization of co-production as a practice, as a method, that is something that is done very deliberately, or you know, with intent to co-produce knowledge, and then also the maybe lesser well-known in climate climate services circles, which is the kind of idea of it as a historical process, as a process that is happening, whether it is planned or intended. The co-production of knowledge and policy and other types of processes. So yeah, I find that very interesting myself as a social scientist. But yeah, would anyone like to sort of carry on that point or take it off maybe the conversation in a different direction over the next couple of minutes, unless someone would like to raise their hand, someone outside of this group, and offer up another perspective. No? Carlos, do you have any thoughts? Maybe you can sort of continue and others can come in, chip in if needed.
Probably I would emphasize again that in relation to standards, certainly, like there has to be co-production of standards themselves, but also to highlight what's the understanding of co-production that also exists out there is that the way standards are co-produced by different actors change from depending what the body is creating that standard. Some standardization bodies emphasize certain types of methods or certain procedures or certain applications of standards, whereas others pay attention to other ones. If one would look at the ISO standards on climate adaptation, but also would look at other best practice guidances, for example, from WMO, you will see that the level of detail that they pay to different criteria is incredibly different. So that's, I think, very interesting to see that depending on what you have to understand the context and the institutional context in which either knowledge or standards themselves have been developed, you know, can highlight some variables and probably diminish some other ones. We know that ISO doesn't pay necessarily attention to things that cannot be quantified, because it's very hard to suggest one method that is well known and well established. Where there's probably other, something that we've seen in our research is that other smaller scale projects will develop their own guidances, trying to highlight really paying attention to the diversity of forms of knowledge that have to be taken into account to create a good and helpful climate adaptation strategies. I'm going to leave it there.
Thanks, Carlos. No, that was great. Asun, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to come in. Thank you, Carlos. So first of all, I completely agree with you that actually building standards is in itself a co-production process. So actually, that's the only way in which you can build consensus. Yusuf explained very clearly that even the different types of standards, deliverables, have different levels of consensus. And once you get to the sort of more formal standards, like the European standards, you really need serious consensus. And that consensus is a co-production with that is very much defined by who sits at the table, so who is participating inside these formal committees. But also, I will say a little bit disagreeing partly with what you are saying. I think that the different types of outputs in those standards also depend on what type of a standard this is. So Climate Europe 2 last year, in the key messages, we outlined one of the key messages was the importance to see that climate services requires a suite of a combination of different types of standards. So you need to have standards that are very technical, and these are going to be very detailed and very dominated by quantified information. That's the case. So it depends what you are standardizing and the type of a standard. That is what determines that level of specific granularity. But then you also have procedural standards, management systems that any organization in Europe must actually demonstrate that they are compliant to the way in which, let's say, a hospital is managed. Or processes of different types. And I think the theme of co-production falls within this category, right? So the CWA is a procedural one, and here not everything is going to be quantifiable. It's going to be very much defined with principles, must-dos, and so on and so forth. And then you have a different complementary suite of issues related to, let's say, key performance indicators. Which are a different type of a standard deliverable. But I'm sure Yusuf also has some additional answers to that.
Yes, thank you very much.
You can come in, and I believe, Grit, did you have a point to make as well? So maybe you can finish off this discussion, and then we close the session. Thank you. Yusuf, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So actually, I'm not an expert on that topic, so I won't, or I cannot give a technical contribution to that discussion. But so just something I want to add to this round is that it's also something that I have said in the past several times, is that standardization, or the topic of standards, it's a heavy topic. As I have started with a standard of standards, defining standards. So I can understand that standards are associated with something very heavy, very strict. There are rules. It's not clear to everyone. There are different types and different levels, and it's very confusing if you're not inside the standardization world. But just something I want to bring in is that I just want to get like outside of the standardization world and just tell that we see our role, or we see standardization as a tool to enable experts, because as I've presented, the research findings, the knowledge, or the technical expertise is already present. It's already existent. And for standardization, our aim or our goal is just to bring in or bring together experts, create the neutral platform for them. And so we can offer them this neutral platform so they can come together and discuss their thoughts. So for us, standardization, standards it's a very strict and very heavy topic. But for me, my keynote is not that standardization is important or something, but it's just to say that standardization is a tool to enable experts to come together. We offer you the neutral platform. It's a tool for experts to come together, as I said, and discuss, because the research findings, the knowledge is already present. And it would be a shame to lose or waste that knowledge or that research that has already been made. And a lot of resources, a lot of efforts have been going in that direction. So just see standardization or standards as a tool for you to enable your work to become something bigger or more presentable, or for something that's more accessible for the broader public. I hope I didn't cause any more confusion, but yeah.
No, that's clear to me. Thank you, Yusuf. I would love to continue our discussion. Grit, perhaps you have a final word?
Indeed, it is. It is almost the final word. I'm going back and looking on the questionnaire with the policymakers we did across all over Europe, and it shines to me that we have a division. We have, on the one hand, those people who clearly are advancing and knowing about standards, and that standards are useful and needed and see the merits of co-production already, and others who still grasp with the term climate service. And what can a climate service do for me? And so I think we need to do much more advocacy. And this project also, Climate Europe 2. We're not only developing and paving the way for standards, but we're also trying to aware more for the need. So when I see this ambivalence, there is still a big divide between users, practitioners, policymakers, knowledgeable, and others still grasping to understand what is it about. So I think this battle is not done yet, but we're on the path. So that would be my private personal conclusion, but I hope it's in line with what the team thinks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Grit, and thank you everyone that have contributed to this session. It's been truly an inspiring and thought-provoking session and hour and a half. So thank you all. And it's, as I say, it's set, I think, the stage very nicely for the rest of the day, and indeed the rest of the Webstival. We will now take belated, apologies for the slight delay, 30-minute coffee break, where perhaps actually there are some remaining questions, I think, in the chat that have yet to be answered. I see Nikete's question came in at the end there, so perhaps people can respond if they have the chance to that, and other questions, and also obviously have a bit of a rest. We will reconvene at 11:30 Central European time and continue our discussion on co-production in a more interactive setting. So we'll have breakout groups, and we will talk about how it relates to the ongoing CEN Workshop Agreement on the topic. So thank you all. See you soon.